up, everybody? This is Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. For those of you that don't know, I started off my CFF analyst career back in 2008. In 2016, I stepped away and came back this year under the moniker Purple Rain. And you are watching the Let Purple Rain podcast. For all of you on YouTube, I'm going to highly recommend you like and subscribe. Never miss an episode when it's coming out and get all the latest news year round for college fantasy football. You can find all of my work at letpurplerain.com. Right now, we're wrapping up the 2024 college fantasy football season. We have one more week left of waiver wires, player rankings, start sit articles just like this. You want to see everything that Let Purple Rain has to offer. You can get a free 7-day trial. Check out everything that the website has. Not have to spend a dime. It's a great deal. And it's going to be running through the off season as well. But I'm going to recommend that 100% for you guys. A 7-day free trial, absolutely worth it. Once the season is done, we're going to be taking off and doing the 2024 Top Gun Challenge. This features some of the top CFF websites in the internet: Campus to Canton, Let Purple Rain, RotoWire, and the CFF site. All four of these sites provided preseason player projections and statistical projections. These sites are going to be going head to head to compete to see who is the best of the best and who had the most accurate player projections once we had the final stats for the 2024 season. Right now, you are watching the Stardom Situm preview show for week 13. In this show, we're going to be reviewing my honorable mentions. If you want to see all of the players as well as reader submitted questions, you can find all of that in the article that's posted on letpurplerain.com. You're going to find a link to that article in the description to this video. I highly recommend you go check it out. Now, let's dive into some college fantasy football. Let's get things kicked off with a start suggestion of Aiden Childs from Michigan State. This is definitely a pick for deeper leagues, Power 4 leagues. Over the last 3 weeks, he's been averaging 17.2 fantasy points per game. Last week against Illinois, he had probably his best game of the year, 24.8 fantasy points. He threw for 256 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and had 40 rushing yards as well. This week he's got Purdue, and man, you just have to be salivating anytime one of your players has Purdue on the schedule. The stats that you see on the screen are the same stats that I use in my own research for player rankings. I want to share with you guys the same sort of stuff that I view on the back end, which is why this is a little more stat heavy on the screen, but I want you guys to be able to see exactly what I see when I'm making these evaluations. Getting back to this game here, Vegas is calling for Michigan State to score 30.5 points against Purdue. Michigan State passing offense is not all that good, but it's okay. We're facing the Boilermakers here. Purdue, they have the 116th fantasy pass defense. They have the 132nd ranked fantasy run defense. They're giving up a 1.9 passing touchdowns per game, and the most impressive stat here for Childs, they're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 77.5% of the time. Childs is going to score. He had 2 touchdowns last week. He has a realistic shot of getting 3 touchdowns this week. The closest matchup that we have here for Childs, looking at this game, is with Maryland. Maryland had the number 21 fantasy pass defense. He put up 25.3 fantasy points, pretty similar to what we saw from him last week against Illinois with 24.8. He has a chance here. I don't think he's going to hit 30, but he should definitely be hitting that mid-20 range again. Definitely worth throwing in there if you're in that deep league, a Power 4 only league, or you're just kind of having to scrounge the barrel for not many waiver wire options being out there. For my sit suggestion, I'm going to go with Curtis Rourke, Indiana. He's been okay over the last 3 weeks, scoring 21 or averaging 21.3 fantasy points per game. His best game during that stretch was against Michigan State, where he put up 29.1 fantasy points. He threw for 263 yards and 4 touchdowns. It's going to be a tall task to match those numbers at Ohio State this week. Vegas is calling for Indiana to only put up 20 points, and I'm going to kind of agree here. If everything plays out the way it should be, Ohio State should win this one. I know there's a lot of diehard Indiana fans out there who think that this is going to be a real tough contest, and Indiana's going to hang in there with them. I'm just not willing to put my fantasy prospects and my fantasy playoff hopes on the line behind anyone on the Indiana team this week. Indiana's pass offense is ranked number 15 for fantasy pass offenses. Ohio State is ranked third in fantasy pass defense. So that matchup definitely favors the Buckeyes. Also, Ohio State, the biggest things that jump out to me, they only allow 0.4 passing touchdowns per game, and they're allowing touchdowns in the red zone only 30.4% of the time. That's going to be rough for Rourke to be getting a lot of yardage, to be getting the touchdowns that he needs to be fantasy relevant for you in your playoff lineups. This is not a great comparison here. The Buckeyes, NFL talent across the board, but the best similar matchup that we have on the schedule to look at for Rourke was Florida International from back in week one. Right now, Florida International has the number 6 fantasy pass defense, so they rank well, like Ohio State, with much lower talent level than Ohio State has. And Rourke could only put up 13.3 fantasy points in that game. I will also mention the ground game was definitely more effective against Florida International than you're going to see against Ohio State. So you may not see the same run pass mix this weekend with Ohio State like you saw with the Florida International game. But, you just kind of have to ask yourself, is the clock about to hit midnight for Indiana and the Cinderella story? They're going to be great. They're going to have a great year. I just think this is not going to be the most productive day, especially from a fantasy standpoint. Moving over to the running backs, we have one of my favorite kind of deep sleeper guys that I actually drafted a little bit in best ball leagues, Kelly Joyner out of South Florida. He has scored 26 points, 26.1 points, and 32.8 points in 3 of his last 4 games. Tulsa's also given up 4.2 yards per carry, almost 2 rushing touchdowns a game, and a whopping 80% red zone touchdown rate. Vegas is calling for 38.5 points, and I definitely agree with them on this one. Similar matchups that we've seen from this year. Charlotte, who's ranked 128th in fantasy run defense, and FAU is ranked 111th in fantasy run defense. Both of these games, he scored 26 points. I think this is going to be a super solid play. If you've got him, stick him in your lineup. He's definitely going to be worth it this week. One guy that's not going to be worth it this week, Floyd Chalk, San Jose State. Over the last 3 games, Chalk has scored less than 10 fantasy points in 2 of those 3 games. UNLV fantasy run offense ranks 48th. They're just under 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game. They're just under 33% on third down conversions allowed. The one good thing going for Chalk here, UNLV has a 60.6% red zone touchdown rate. Anything once you start hitting 60 and up, I like. So if San Jose State offense can get down there, if they're not trying to throw balls to their receivers, he's got a decent shot. If they want to hand him off the rock, that he might be able to score. Last week against Boise State, though, Boise State was ranked 31st in fantasy run defense, and Chalk could only put up 3.7 fantasy points. I think this is going to be 2 weeks in a row where Chalk's going to go without a touchdown. And, with your playoff hopes on the line, I would not be throwing him out there, hoping that this stays a high-scoring affair, and they're trying to use the ground game to, keep the game script mixed and to try and keep the UNLV defense or offense off the field. Wide receiver, I'm going to admit here, my start selection, this may blow up in my face, or I may look like a genius. I don't think there's going to be any middle ground, guys. I'm going with Mikey Matthews from Cal. Right now, when you look at the points per game over the last 3 weeks, it's a bit deceiving. In those 3 weeks, he scored 2.8 fantasy points, 23.2 fantasy points, and 8.8 fantasy points. Things that I like about this matchup, though, despite that inconsistency that we've seen. His quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, he's averaging 45 pass attempts per game over the last 3 weeks. Matthews is averaging 6.3 targets per game over the last 3 weeks. They're throwing the ball around. They're being successful as well. What I don't like, Matthews has only scored 1 touchdown this season. This is the part that can make this prediction blow up in my face if he does not reach the end zone yet again. You can't deny this matchup. Stanford is ranked 129th for fantasy pass defense, giving up almost 2.5 passing touchdowns per game. They're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 73.2% of the time. Similar matchups that we have to try and grade this one out would be Wake Forest. And that Wake Forest game was the only game where Matthews has scored a touchdown this season. That's the reason why you see such a high point total. And when I mentioned the last 3 weeks, why there's such a big disparity. He can get yards, he can get some receptions, but he just is struggling to reach the end zone. I want to see if the rivalry game that we're going to have here creates an explosion in the offense where Matthews will be the guy that benefits on the outside. One guy I'm not going to trust this week, and I kind of have mixed feelings on. So I'm sorry if I'm about to burst your bubble with this one, but Justin Bowick from Ball State. Over the last 2 games, he's been a monster. He scored 33 and 31 fantasy points. During those 2 games, he's averaged 11 targets a game. He's getting 21 yards per reception and a touchdown and a half per game over that stretch. He's come out of nowhere. He's been lit on fire. I can't sit here and exactly explain how this is turning out because in these 2 games, he faced Buffalo, who has the number 125th fantasy pass defense. So it would make sense him having a huge game. But then he also played Miami of Ohio, who has the 14th best fantasy pass defense. So you see this huge swing in the level of competition that he's facing, and he's still putting up pretty much equal numbers both weeks. So it's hard for me to wrap my head around exactly what the situation is with Bowick yet. Is it just talent taking over? He's stepping into his own. Is it something that was in a game plan? I don't have that answer yet. And with that amount of uncertainty is part of the reason why I'm saying I want to hold off on playing him here. We have seen him do good against Miami of Ohio, as we said, ranked 14th in fantasy pass defense. He's got Bowling Green this week, who's ranked 16th in fantasy pass defense. So it's a very similar matchup. One big difference here, Bowling Green is only giving up 1 passing touchdown per game. They're really stingy in the red zone, only giving up a touchdown about 45% of the time. It's not great matchup if you're looking at him to continue getting these big numbers he's had the last 2 weeks. Similar matchups that we've seen. We mentioned the Miami of Ohio one here where he put up 31 points, but then 3 games ago, and actually the game before that Miami of Ohio game, Northern Illinois, they have the 24th best fantasy pass defense. He only had 6.1 fantasy points. So it's really tough to determine. It seems like he is going to be a complete boom for you. He's going to hit 20 plus fantasy points, or he might, with the current workload he's getting, I doubt he's going to be under 10 fantasy points, but there's a chance he might only get you 12, 13 fantasy points if it's something like we see from this Northern Illinois game. There's just too much uncertainty for me to be willing to trust him in my lineup. And that's the cautious reason why I'm going to say hold off on him this week and leave him on the bench. For tight end, I'm going with another guy here from this Cal Stanford game, and you guys are going to find out this week. This is my favorite matchup for looking for guys in the passing game. Jack Endries, tight end here. He's the most stable guy for the Cal pass catchers. Definitely more stable than Matthews. He's averaging 9.9 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks, but that is a little deceiving. If you go back over his last 6 games, he scored double-digit fantasy points in 5 of those 6 games. So he's been playing a lot better than that 9.9 average that we see on the screen. Vegas likes this one. They think Cal's going to score 34 and a half points. I've already reviewed this matchup, so I'm not going to go into a bunch of details there. But you have a wide scoring range with the similar matchups that I see here with Endries. Against Wake Forest, he put up 8.9 fantasy points, but then against Pitt, he put up almost 26 fantasy points. I expect something in the middle. I think he's going to get somewhere in the teens. There is the potential, I think, with this rivalry game that you could see the Cal offense explode. I'm not going to hold my breath on 20 fantasy points, but what we can see here from Pitt, it's not unusual for him to score that amount. One guy, though, that definitely is not going to hit 20 fantasy points this week is Ben Urosek from Georgia. He had his best game of the year last week against Tennessee. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 51 yards. I know, guys, that stat line's not setting the world on fire, but for anyone that was looking at him thinking, oh, we expected this guy to step up, now it's his time. Now he's going to start playing to what we thought we might see out of him in the offseason. I'm going to say pump the brakes there. What helped him here with Tennessee, he had a competitive game where the offense could lean on him. And typically competitive games where defenses are able to take away some of the better players, those are the games where these tight ends tend to excel. And I'm going to say what we saw last week is not going to be the average moving forward. When you're looking here at UMass, this is not going to be a competitive game. And UMass has a good looking pass defense, but it's because their run defense is just so awful. I'm not even going to go into the specific pass stats that we got here. There's no, like Georgia's just going to run the ball down their throat. Their running backs are probably going to dominate all the yardage, all the scoring opportunities. And there's really no similar game to try and compare this to where Georgia's faced a low ranking team because they have played a really good schedule, but one that statistically is good against the pass, but it's because they're Swiss cheese against the run. So I really don't have anything to compare that with, but I'm just going to say, don't think that we're going to see more of the same of what we saw from Tennessee, and you're hoping maybe you squeeze out a touchdown. It's just not going to happen here. We do have a special honorable mention submitted question. Normally, readers submit their questions to me on my website and on X, and I answer them on the main part of this podcast, which is behind the paywall. But one of my friends here at CFF Lists, Jeremy Miller, put out a question on X and wanted to get the internet's opinion on this. I want to throw out there for you guys, if you have not checked out CFF Lists their podcast here on YouTube, go check it out, subscribe to them. They do great waiver wire coverage. They'll do a live draft each week of different waiver wire guys, and everyone on the show will build a roster that's going to compete for that week with the waiver wire guys that they're drafting. It's definitely going to give you a leg up as you're looking for waiver wire options, especially toward the end of the year. They throw out some good strategies, things that you can do that'll definitely help give you an edge. So go over to their YouTube channel, subscribe today. Jeremy is asking us to pick one quarterback from this group, 5-point passing touchdowns. He's got Bryson Daly from Army facing Notre Dame. He has Joey Aguilar from Appalachian State facing James Madison. And he has Ethan Basco from Coastal Carolina facing Georgia Southern. The stats provided on the screen, once again, these are the exact stats that I use when I do my own research and I come up with my player rankings. For the color codings, to make things a little simpler for you guys, dark red is very bad. Light red, bad. Black is average, middle of the road. Light green is good. Dark green is really good. Pretty simple concept there. When I start looking at these guys here, I'm going to start with Daly. Daly's an option quarterback. So the stats that you're seeing on there are for Notre Dame's fantasy run defense. He's obviously the bad matchup of the group. Every stat on the board here is red. Army has not faced a run defense this good all season. I don't even think they've faced, maybe middle of the pack is the best they've faced in fantasy run defenses. Just really simple. If you play Daly, it's going to be a bloodbath, just like all the red you see on the screen. You need to sit him. Joey Aguilar, for fantasy pass defense rank and fantasy pass touchdowns per game, they're not that good. What I do like from this, though, is that you've got a red zone touchdown rate of 63.6%. The only similar matchups that we can kind of compare this to with Aguilar would be his game with Louisiana Lafayette. Louisiana Lafayette had the number 20th ranked fantasy pass defense, and he put up just 16 points in that game. Not terrible, but it's also not what you want from your fantasy team here in the playoffs. Vasco's obviously the guy that stands out on the board here. He's the only guy with green all the way down. Since he can run the ball, I'm also going to kind of throw out some of the run stats for you that I couldn't fit on the screen for you. Georgia Southern, has the 108th ranked fantasy run defense. They're giving up 5 yards a carry and 2 rushing touchdowns per game. Pretty good stats when you mix it in with the passing stats on the screen. Similar matchups that we had for Vasco was Appalachian State and Virginia. In both those games, he scored in the 20 fantasy point range. He could hit the high 20s this week. I really doubt he'll hit 30 fantasy points, but looking between basically him and Aguilar, he's the only guy that really has a chance of a solid 25 fantasy point day. I would not count on that from Aguilar. So it makes a pretty simple decision here going with Vasco out of these three. I want to thank you guys for watching the Stardom Situm preview show for week 13. If you want to see all of the players as well as reader submitted questions, go to the article on letpurplerain.com. I have the link in the description below. Check it out. If you're not currently a premium subscriber, you can do a 7-day free trial, still be able to watch and see all of my selections this week and get to see what I'm going to bring to the table for next week if you're making the championship games here. And definitely, if you're paying attention to the show, I'm hoping that you guys make it to the championship, and I hope you guys can win it. To mention once again, once the regular season is over in December, I'm going to be covering the 2024 Top Gun Challenge. This is a competition of some of the best CFF websites out on the internet, where we're going to be comparing the preseason player stat projections that we all made to the final stats of the regular season. This year's Top Gun Challenge class consists of Campus to Canton, Let Purple Rain, RotoWire, and the CFF site. All 4 sites are going to be going head to head over the course of December to figure out who is the best of the best at preseason projections. I want to thank everybody for joining. You guys watching these episodes, reading the articles, you are what allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to thank you for watching the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.